In the Iliad and Odyssey, Homer makes use of two scribes to construct narrative revolving around this great conflict of the Trojan War and Odysseus' journey home. The two scribes are Mercury, who most are familiar with, and the other is Iris, who might be a little less well known, but she's actually the one who is more visible in the Iliad, in that she features quite frequently interacting with the mortals as a way to both meter and control narrative. The mercurial transmission is there in the Iliad, it's just not as noticeable. It's slicker and tighter, probably where symbol recognizance is controlled through graduated initiation rites, where the symbolism is indecipherable to large swaths of a population and only understood by top tier members of this cult. In the Iliad, Mercury is mentioned in Book 2 and comes down to fight in Book 20 after Achilles has had his shield forged by Vulcan, right before the last fight in the duel of Achilles and Hector, essentially this battle royale at the end of the Iliad to finally settle the score. Moreover, in Book 2 of the Iliad, Mercury is mentioned second after Jove in this hierarchy of the scepter that Agamemnon has come to hold through his father and ancestors. So here, let's read from Book 2 of the Iliad. Then King Agamemnon rose, holding his scepter. This was the work of Vulcan, who gave it to Jove, the son of Saturn. Jove gave it to Mercury, slayer of Argus, guide and guardian. King Mercury gave it to Pelops, the mighty charioteer, and Pelops to Atreus, shepherd of his people. Atreus, when he died, left it Thyestes, rich in flocks, and Thyestes, in his turn, left it to be borne by Agamemnon, that he might be lord of all Argos and of the islands. Leaning then on his scepter, he addressed the Argives. This second placing and tucking Mercury in there right after Jove, along with the explanation that the craft of the scepter is entrusted to Vulcan, and then not really mentioning either gods until much later in the Iliad, is a way of hiding the mercurial and volcanic element of the Iliad, where this explicit and universal recognition of the actual power dynamics within the palace court probably wasn't necessary, or better yet, preferable, and that there wasn't any threat to those in this cult in the early to mid-Bronze Age. The power was much more autocratic and consolidated at the top, and the way to meter or control the narrative around the story of the power hierarchy, or like who is really in charge, is through these gradual inductions of people into their cult, through rigorous initiation rites and symbol recall, and eventually by the end of the Bronze Age and into the archaic Iron Age, the world was even less urbanized than before, and Mercury needed to come down and be a more visible figure in the Odyssey, where we have this New Testament, as you will, where the Wild Wild West type shootouts of the late Bronze Age and the Iliad are over, and this adoption of this cunning Christ or Peter-like Odysseus is needed. I don't think the archaic Iron Age was a total wasteland, and there was probably still some emergent urban centers, and it's probably like today where we're seeing this trend away from these modern-day Babylonias, like of New York, Chicago, and LA, that have entered this dark age, losing young and ambitious talent to more up-and-coming cities. And let's be frank, these cities are cities with large populations of people with European descent, and even states that were long forgotten have seen huge influxes of new people like Colorado, Montana, the Dakotas, and this trend is probably going to continue for some time. If you read Euripides or Homer's version of the Cyclopes, and then using Mark Brauman's JEM theory, the linking of Bacchus and more generally wine with the blood sacrament of Jesus, you can argue that this new docile and evangelical form of a mercurial transmission that is ever present in the Odyssey is necessary for narrative control, where Mercury personally intervenes in Odysseus' journey back home. In addition, Odysseus is a direct descendant of Mercury, and I'd imagine it's like the narrative has become noisy and clunky, and it's like a shitty car, right? You can hear it coming down the road a mile away, and today the narrative is the same. It has become much dumber, and we can spot these degenerate bacchanal and Caducean elements in our society easily. And as we become more defeated and sheepish, this more in-your-face, church, street preacher style is needed, and it's done intentionally. My interpretation is that in order to control narrative of these large atomized urban populations of the early Iron Age and the Classical Ages, a more visible mercurial transmission is needed, where cultic initiation rites are more universal, and you could even participate in these religious ceremonies done without your permission, like done when you're a newborn or young precocious child, and everyone can be a part of this club, and we can start to form a recognition of the symbolism from youth, and you will feel more inclined to join this community and respond to these symbols you associate with from this cult of Vulcan, Mercury, and probably most likely the universal Bacchus. In our modern day atomized dark age, everyone is desperate for a speck of clout or community. Basically, I'd imagine the membership to these mercurial and Vulcan cults, or probably most likely the Balkanal cult, becomes easier in the more urbanized or dense networks of the early Iron Age into the Classical Age, becoming ever more universal as the years go on. Thus, the symbols have to become more recognizable and more present as a way to signal and direct these legions of increasingly dumb so-called revolutionaries. Right, you want to keep them just smart enough to recognize the symbols to know who and when to attack, but dumb enough not to connect all the dots. Furthermore, because our society is also becoming more racially diverse, which you could argue happened in the Near East during the Late Bronze Age, the symbolism needs to become more secularized, capitalistic, and less entangled with other gods as a way to direct your worship to Yahweh indirectly. So these multi-ethnic, broad coalition of urbanized people can form around these dumb, childlike, and funny symbols as unwitting, low-level initiation into powerful and mysterious cults of the Cyclopes, Vulcan, Mercury, and Bacchus that we know today mainly in syncretized form as Yahweh. And this is what we see today, huge protest movements that actually benefit those who really control our world. If you read Euripides, the Cyclopes, and Bacchus, it's pretty explicit and degenerate, and the joke's easy to understand and childlike, and that's on purpose. It's a universal initiation rite that takes place through these assemblances of esoteric symbology, whether in a play, epic poem, or a movie today. And Euripides, like Homer in the Odyssey, is a signal for the liberal half of our country, which makes sense. This in-your-face mercurial transmission isn't so visible in the Iliad because it wasn't needed in the early to mid-Bronze Age. Once again, the power was much more consolidated at the top of the pyramid, but with the rise of the urbanization and commerce along with technological advances in the late early Iron Age and the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age into the Classical Ages, these new middle class or second tier cults like those of Vulcan and Mercury developed and expanded as a way to keep control of the narrative over this new complex world. And across the political aisle, we have conservatives who, whether we like it or not, represent the Apollonian to our rivals. And they understand how important honor is to an Aryan, and his want and ability to defend with force these abstract principles like family, tradition, law, morality, that allow civilization to form, which isn't a bad thing, but only when redirected. And this is exactly what we see today, our energy scattered and diluted, quite literally in that they want this new multicultural working class rainbow coalition to form around the GOP. And they're also identifying the rainbow too as rally cry and target for attack. And it's funny that people are noticing and kind of wondering what's going on with the rainbow. It's literally everywhere in the GOP, but also the world in general and American geopolitics. But they also can't effectively fight back because of these mercurial elements in our society, like the media and the press, but also the Cyclopean and Bacchanal elements of degeneracy and street protest evangelicals. Imagine trying to do any type of counter-protest, especially one that is anti-rainbow. You'll be forced into this trap of a shit show street fight with half-wit fake revolutionaries. So in the Greek mythos, the rainbow is represented by the scribal goddess Iris. And Iris, once again, is the scribe most active in the Iliad, but doesn't feature at all in the Odyssey. And it's because she's not needed. There are no more cities in the Aegean to conquer at the end of the Bronze Age, really. Not until classical Greece and Rome that we see cities like Babylon and the Mediterranean appear. Not to say there wasn't urbanization in the late Bronze Age or early Iron Age, and I think the Apollonian is subject to this dilution or degenerate element in urban environments. And Mark has written about how the Apollonian cult has been degenerated through these later myths, and we can understand this once again through the rainbow. So the Hittites had a similar pantheon to the Greeks, with the storm god Theshub at the top and the sun god as a very close second. But they also absorbed all the gods of the people they conquered, and their pantheon became a morass of all these deities, a behemoth of a religion that probably as a result weighed down the civilization, allowing them to be easily subverted through these analogous urbanized cults of Hephaestus, Mercury, and Bacchus via universal initiation rites. I mean, if you have 1,000 gods, every day is three different festivals and prayers, along with the daily sacrifices. And back then, people were more religious, as it was more likely compulsory. And all these gods and festivals, it was like a cornucopia of degeneracy, of subversion, like today, with every day a new national day for this, or a national day of remembrance for that. It's a sinking behemoth. And this morass, or behemoth, is like the Iliad, where this Aryan Apollonian society, like that of the Greeks and of the Hittites and Luvians, was projected through this Semitic crystalline lens of a prism, and we get the rainbow of the Greek scribe Iris, this kaleidoscope of Olympian gods, demigods, river gods, heroes, and thousands of other people. Like, if the Iliad was a city, I'd imagine it was like Babylon, once beautiful and elegant, an Aryan city, corrupted into this sulphurous, labyrinthine back alleyway of filth and saturnine wizardry like we've never seen before. And anyways, so Iris is helpful in that we can use her as a metric to better understand how the narrative, and particularly that of the Apollonian, is transmitted and distorted in the Iliad. Right? The Iliad starts with Apollo as this distinct god, right? He's owning Agamemnon. But eventually, by the end, he is lost in the back and forth of the Olympian struggle in the Trojan War. The elementary essence of Apollo is his photonic properties, right? He is light personified, and his pure message of race is mutated into this leviathan of a rainbow mosaic that sinks the Greek religion. So the narrative of the Iliad, like I said, is a mess of battles and endless back and forth and countless minor characters cruelly sent to their death. And it's usually brought on by this messenger, Iris, the rainbow goddess, the rainbow scribe, who comes from Olympus and tells either the Trojans or the Greeks that they have to go back to fighting, because who knows what the reason for the day is. It's never ending. You're just supposed to be activated by this symbolic messenger who takes the form visually as a rainbow. And like every day on Twitter is a new battle for conservatives that some rainbow scribe has come down to signal where the rainbow is pointing to and how and when to get back to the fight. And conservatives have just straight up adopted the rainbow flag now as their symbol, so they had to incorporate new symbols to both direct conservatives to attack, but also vice versa, where liberals understand when they can play victim and protest. And everyone knows rainbows and understands basically how they work, right? This optical illusion, or how they're a function of light from the sun. Today we know we get the rainbow by shining white light through a prism or crystalline material, and through the ordering of the molecules in the crystal, you get this ordered scattering and projection of light. And we can't be naive to think the ancients didn't know the optical properties of light, and more specifically solar light, and how it behaves when passing through crystals like a prism. I mean, a Greek guy measured the circumference of the earth just using the light of the sun thousands of years ago. And we also know what type of people love shiny rocks and tricks and smokes and mirrors. And so we can imagine the type of symbolic language or mythos that has been constructed to relate both this Aryan Apollonian element that was ascendant and to those trying to subvert it, right? Because like during the late Bronze Age and through the classical times, this sun god Apollo was second only to the storm god in many great cities of the classical ages of the Mediterranean, and rival factions obviously saw it as a cult that needed to be subverted. And it works by diluting or creating this kaleidoscope of gods, heroes, and thousands of other characters and mythos that we know as the Olympians to distract, redirect, and harness our energy, when in reality we should be worried about keeping this pure photonic energy of the Apollonian focused on our race, and allow everything to follow accordingly from that race-first perspective without any filtering or passing through this Semitic prism of the rainbow goddess Iris, as seen in the Iliad. So the way to stop this redirecting of the solar energy is to gatekeep with non-universal initiation rites that are graduated and consolidated at the top through symbol recognizances and literal and esoteric understanding of mythos, right? Every white should want to be an Apollonian, but you can't become the Burger King Kids Club, where you are forced into battle by this tangle of rainbow alliances and required to fight battles that aren't yours and suffer severe casualties in the process. And the most important part of Iris is that she singles Achilles to finally rejoin the Greek contingent, and he has his day of glory, killing Hector in the process in the most, epic clash of the Bronze Age. And we can understand Achilles as the covenant from the book of Exodus, this roping in of the Aryan into this martial service of the Moses-like Agamemnon. Homer says Achilles pines for the war cry, and Hector is the Ark of the Covenant, where in Greek, Hector means to hold, and the Ark holds the covenant, which again is Achilles. And in the book of Joshua, the Israelites carry the Ark of the Covenant around the city of Jericho before sacking it. And we can imagine Jericho as the city of Troy, where Hector and Achilles go around the city too before fighting in Book 2 of the Iliad, resembling the Ark of the Covenant in the Exodus, or Book of Joshua. And Odysseus in the Iliad is like the Old Testament Joshua, this captain or warlike figure, and he transforms into the Christ or Peter-like figure in Homer's second epic poem, the Odyssey, after his meeting with the Cyclopes in Book 9, once again, of the Odyssey. This Last Supper is similar to the story of Christ through the blood sacrament of wine, or Bacchus, and the blood of the Cyclopes. And Odysseus emerges from his cave 3 days later like Jesus on Easter, where, again, we can link the wine, or Bacchus, to the blood sacrament of Jesus during the Last Supper in the book of Matthew in the New Testament, using Mark Brahman's JEM theory. It's the early Iron Age that Odysseus ushers in at the end of Book 9 in opening lines of Book 10, and with the new age of man, the Iron Age, comes prospective new Aryan civilizations in the eastern and mid-Mediterranean Sea, emergent urban centers to visit and subvert, preach the gospel like Odysseus's traverses and the Cleos and all the different journeys and epic adventures he goes on. Perhaps Odysseus is more like Peter or Paul than Christ, who is more analogous to the Bacchanal. So we can interpret this as the Odyssey is like this new playbook for the urbanized liberal to attack the Apollonian and essentially start brother wars. Like Achilles and Hector didn't need to fight, but it was Iris who comes down to message and entice Achilles back to the fray, resembling the Irish mythos of the leprechaun, who appears to steal the gold right at the end of the rainbow, where once again the rainbow is this symbol directing one to waste their energy, because you'll never get there. It's this eternal journey, this pot of gold. And the pot of gold is this brother war, this entanglement of alliances in the Iliad, and scattering of the distinct Apollonian beam of racial focus that we see initially in Book 1 of the Iliad. It's this Ark of the Covenant, this Achilles versus Hector. Moreover, Iris appears again in Book 23 after the funeral games of Patroclus, who is kin or next to kin of Achilles. And Patroclus was killed by Hector, and the killing motivated Achilles to rejoin Agamemnon in the Greek camp. And we can think of the dead body of Patroclus, or the former armor of Achilles, as the golden calf, which the Israelites danced and partied around when Moses went up to Mount Sinai to chisel out the 10 Commandments from Yahweh. And Achilles, once again, is this covenant or service to Agamemnon, and as a result, this god Vulcan, who built the scepter he holds and brings power. And in Homer, Book 23 writes here, let's read. Then he committed all to the resistless and devouring might of the fire. He groaned aloud and called on his dead comrade by name. Farewell, he cried, Patroclus, even in the house of Hades. I am now doing all that I have promised you. 12 brave sons of noble Trojans shall the flames consume, along with yourself, but dogs, not fire, shall devour the flesh of Hector, son of Priam. Thus did he vaunt, but the dogs came not about the body of Hector, for Jove's daughter Venus kept them off night and day, and anointed him with ambrosial oil of roses, that his flesh might not be torn when Achilles was dragging him about. Phoebus Apollo, moreover, sent a dark cloud from heaven to earth, which gave shade to the whole place where Hector lay, that the heat of the sun might not parch his body. Now the pyre about dead Patroclus would not kindle. Achilles therefore bethought him of another matter. He went apart and prayed to the two winds, Boreas and Zephyrus, vowing them goodly offerings. He made them many drink offerings from the golden cup, and besought them to come and help them, that the wood might make haste to kindle, and the dead bodies be consumed. Fleet Iris heard him praying, and started off to fetch the winds. They were holding high feast in the house of boisterous Zephyrus, when Iris came running up to the stone threshold of the house, and stood there. But as soon as they set eyes on her, they all came towards her, and each of them called her to him. But Iris would not sit down. I cannot stay, she said. I must go back to the streams of Oceanus, in the land of the Ethiopians. And it's Iris who helps kindle the fire of Hephaestus to burn the body of Patroclus, the golden calf. And once again, Iris is important to understand the meter and flow of the Iliad, where everything builds up to this one cataclysmic moment in battle royale, this world war or galactic battle of vast alliances. It's what Homer wants, or whoever's transmitting this prismal projection of the Apollonian in the Olympian mythos, this constant fight with one another and covenants to fight for other gods, and diluting our pure message of race through this scattering into a rainbow of multiculturalism. So like on January 6th, they called it the Jericho March or something, where like the myth, you're supposed to be able to overturn or sack a city through walking around and shouting stuff. And they even brought the horns and everything. They blew them. What it did, though, was psychologically motivate people to believe they were taking place in some kind of consequential Armageddon or sack of Troy, an Aristeia moment that Achilles feels in Book 21 and Book 22 of the Iliad. But in reality, it was a signal by the rainbow scribes to diffuse the energy of the Apollonian by drawing them out in conflict with the Bacchanal, Mercurial, and Volcanic forces of the fake revolutionary protest movements we see in the USA. And this video is an initiation rite itself, right? Where after this, I doubt anyone will look at the rainbow flag the same, and hopefully you'll understand it as both a battle flag for the Bacchanal, Mercurial, and Cyclopean liberal sect of our society, and war cry for the conservative, scattered-brain Apollonian conservative wing. So keep your power levels hidden and wait for Jupiter to ascend to his rightful throne again, and then the Apollonian can come and slay Python and clean out the brimstone stench and serpentine filth of the Pythian temple.